Okay, so I know the title of this video is going to be a little bit harsh, but there's been a lot of noise and confusion about the whole suite of DJI products. For example, does this part work with this part? Do I lose this feature or that feature? Do I have to plug my phone in to use my goggles and fly? And the truth is, I just want you to have the best flying experience with the most flexibility possible. Now, let's be honest here. If your main concern is image quality and weight, the DJI Goggles 2 is hands down the best goggles right now. But for anything else, the V2 goggles supersedes it in every feature and performance to this date. Now, the only disclaimer here is that I'm making this video with the information I have at this time. So if DJI decides to change these features or update the firmware on the DJI Goggles 2 or the Air units, then this video here could change. So let's begin with the DJI hardware. Now I have a list right here. I have 10 things here that DJI made for the FPV product or for the FPV market. If there's more, please, or I missed one, leave them down below in the comments. Maybe you can correct me. And that's pretty cool. So let's work in chronological order, and we'll start with the DJI Goggles V1, as well as the original Air unit, as well as the original DJI Controlle. Those are the first three products on there. Then came the DJI Goggles V2, which is what I have right here. After that, we have the DJI FPV drone, and along with that came the motion controller, which I don't have as well. After that, we had the Controller 2, then we have the Avata, the O3 Air unit, and the DJI Goggles 2. All right, so those are the 10 things that I can think of off the top of my head that DJI have made in the FPV world or for the FPV market. And I bring this up because we're gonna talk about how all these components mesh or work together or doesn't, the lack thereof. So let's categorize the last four. Talk about the Controller 2, the Avata, the O3 Air unit, and the Goggles 2. We're gonna categorize those as second generation FPV products. Those all came together with the Avata. Now, the reason why we want to separate that from the other is because all the previous products or items did or can work together seamlessly without the intervention of DJI. Now, unlike other manufacturers in the world, DJI did not make their newest components compatible or reverse compatible with their older products. Say, for example, you have a PlayStation 1, a PS1, you bought a lot of games for it, and then 4 or 5 years pass and you want to buy a PlayStation 2, 3, or 4, then usually Sony will make the PlayStation 2, 3, or 4 reverse compatible to play the PlayStation 1 games. Well, apparently DJI had other plans, and that's not what they went with. Instead of making their newest equipment compatible with their first gen or all the existing products on the market, they said, nope, we're gonna go to our existing products, choose whichever one we want, and then make whatever we want compatible with our newest equipment and gear. Yeah, that's a big difference, guys. Now, if we have existing and pretty decent first gen products, if DJI does not support it, you have to make a decision whether to upgrade all your equipment to the new system or to stay with the first gen system. It's a pretty harsh reality. Well, that's why I'm here making this video, because there's a lot of talk what's compatible with what, people are frustrated, and why I'm saying the V2 goggles is the best or better than the DJI Goggles 2. So to make a long story short, to fly in the new or next gen or second gen FPV system, you have to either ditch your V1 goggles or your Controller 1. And a lot of people do fly with their original controller. It's kind of hard to get the new controller. And if you're invested maybe $300, $400, $500, $600 in your original V1 goggles, then you have to either sell it, it's not compatible. There could be some technicalities in there, some performance issues in there, but still, this could all be solved if they just made the newer equipment compatible with the first gen products. Now, you're probably screaming at the screen and saying, no, the Goggles 2 is still better in every way compared to the V2. But I have a list here, and let's talk about some of the components that are compatible with the DJI Goggles 2 versus the V2. We're gonna start with the DJI Goggles 2, the newest one. And I have a list right here. Obviously, it is compatible with the original Air unit, which is this one right here. And that was not available at the time that product came out. They've released some newer firmware to now make this more reverse compatible with the original Air unit. Granted, there's still some limitations. At the time of filming, there's still the inability to record the DVR from the original Air unit, and it's still kind of iffy if you can even record OSD, or if there's even OSD coming from the original Air unit with the Goggles 2. So there's still some slight limitations there. The Goggles 2 is obviously compatible with the O3 Air unit. Obviously the Goggles 2 came up with the Avata, and then the O3 Air unit is obviously the VTX that came with the Avata. So it does make sense that it is compatible with the O3 Air unit. The third thing is the controller 2. The Goggles 2 obviously is compatible with the newer controller. Obviously that was sold alongside the Avata, so that makes sense why they're compatible. The fourth thing the Goggles 2 is compatible with is the motion controller. And a lot of people don't use that, especially for us in the FPV world, then we're not gonna use that. But if you have purchased the Avata, obviously, then the Goggles 2 will be compatible with the motion controller. Now the fifth and final thing that the Goggles 2 is compatible with is obviously the Avata. And it does make sense why it is compatible with the Avata. It just makes sense. It's a second gen product, it's a second gen drone, and these two things work seamlessly together. So those are the 5 things that at the time of filming in the product line, the Goggles 2 are or is compatible with. All right, so let's talk about the list of things that's compatible with the DJI Goggles V2. The first thing here obviously is the original Air unit. Obviously these two things were released together. They're first generation products. So these two things work together. Obviously you would expect that. The second thing though, which is surprising, is the O3 Air unit. Now, I made an initial DJI video when the Avata was going to be released. It was a pre-release obviously. And I did say that these things were going to be compatible with it. And technically it was, because you can assume that if these goggles here are going to be sold alongside the Avata, then that means that this O3 Air unit should support the V2 goggles, and sure enough, it was. But the next thing the V2 goggles is compatible with is the original or V1 controller. Obviously, it was sold along the original FPV system and the first generation or the FPV drone. So obviously that makes sense that it is compatible with the first radar. As well, the next on the list is compatible with the new controller as well. So both controllers, which makes sense, is compatible with the Avata, so it has to work or communicate with the controller too. The fifth thing that's compatible with the V2 goggles is the motion controller. And as I said before, we're not going to be using that usually or typically in the FPV world, but that was sold alongside the original FPV drone as well as the Avata, making this goggles here compatible with the motion controller. The sixth product that this thing is compatible with is the original FPV drone. Obviously that drone was released alongside or sold along with this V2 goggles, and it makes perfect sense. Last but not least is the Avata. These goggles here, surprisingly, when DJI made the announcement that they're gonna ship the Avata, and they had two options, a option with the original Goggles 2, or the Goggles 2, and the V2 as a cheaper option, I was kind of surprised and blown away. So if you're keeping tally of the numbers of components that's compatible with both, that's 5 for the Goggles 2 and 7 for the Goggles V2. Now, beyond all the list of compatibility items, these V2 goggles also have superior performance in their goggles. The specs are a lot superior, well, I say a lot, but it is superior or better than the Goggles 2. And that's cool because you get all the benefits of the Goggles 2 as far as the O3 Air unit, the penetration and the range, without any of the downsides. You're talking about higher frame rates, lower latency, and the ability to have an analog input, which I have right here for my analog goggles. So I can use this as a analog goggles or a DJI goggles, opposed to the DJI Goggles 2 where there's no inputs and that's it. In addition to that, you can upgrade these V2 goggles with the WTF operating system to give you features like OSD in your goggles as well as in your recordings. I've done a full video on how to do that, as well as the 1200 milliwatt hack, which is not available in the Goggles 2, and as well as audio input from your Air unit. These are all things that you can't do with the Goggles 2, so there's a lot more advantages with this than the Goggles 2. So everything that we talked about, all in the name of image quality and weight. Sure, if you want to get better image quality, those things have OLED displays, and obviously they're a little bit smaller in dimensions and lighter. If those 2 or 3 things mean that much to you, image quality, weight, and dimensions mean a lot to you, then sure, go for that. And don't get me wrong, I actually wanted to pre-order the Goggles 2, and if it was in my local stores right now, I would have a Goggles 2. Who knows, I'll probably still buy one in the near future. But for me, honestly guys, flexibility is the most important thing. If I can get similar or equal performance, not have to buy one additional item, and have this thing do multiple purposes, meaning it can record OSD, it can have OSD, I can fly analog, I can have inputs and outputs. Yeah, I'll do everything in one goggle, guys. This makes sense, a multi-purpose tool. And for me, that's the most important thing. Now, I haven't even talked about the price or touched about the price. These things were around $550 to $600. They've been dropped dramatically to around $450, while the new ones coming around $600 and I think recently bumped up to around $650. So there's a huge price difference, and you probably aren't gonna get much more features. You might actually get less features or less capabilities with the goggles 2. So think about that when you do have to make that decision of to get the V2 or the goggles 2. I don't want to overstress this, but with the ability to root these goggles V2, you have a lot more potential, guys. It's amazing what you can do with this, and there's really no limitation. There's nothing I can't do with these goggles in the DJI ecosystem. So to conclude, what do I think? Well, if you want to go with the DJI goggles 2, I think those are amazing goggles, guys. They're slim, they're really clear. As I said before, I actually tried to pre-order one. But besides that, I do think the benefits of the goggles V2 outweigh the drawbacks and downsides of the goggles 2. So what do you think? If you have to start over from the beginning, from scratch, and you had no goggles, would you opt for the DJI goggles 2 or V2? That's what I want to know. Let me know in the comment section down below which one makes more sense to you, especially if you're new into the hobby and you're trying to get into the DJI ecosystem, because the DJI products they perform pretty well actually. So let me know what you think about that down below. And if you're looking for reviews on the DJI goggles V2, as well as the 03 Air unit and the original Air unit, I've done full reviews on these. I'll leave them linked right here so you can take a look at it. So thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.